Sarah was washing dishes when she heard a loud noise coming from the garden. She peeked out the window and saw her son Max standing in the garden with a baby in his arms. After a while, she froze and then she ran out and asked him how the hell did he get this baby. He hesitated for a moment and then said, "I'm sorry I had to do this." Sarah had no idea it would turn their whole lives upside down. Sarah immediately called the police in the hope of finding the child's parents, but the police did not realize the urgency of the situation. They took the kids and told Sarah they'd be in touch. Yet Sarah knew she would never hear from them again. She must solve the mystery herself. Sarah always thought it was more than that. Who gives a random baby to an 8-year-old? So she decided to solve the mystery herself. Because this child belongs to no one, Sarah's investigation finally gave her the answers she needed to solve the mystery. But it didn't come without a cost, because she put herself and her son Max in great danger to get those answers. Who left the baby with Max? What will Sarah's investigation find? What happens to the baby after all this? Sarah had just returned home from an errand when she heard a knock at the door. She didn't wait for anyone, so she hesitated for a moment before opening it. To her surprise, she found her 8-year-old son Max standing outside with a baby in his arms. "Max, what are you doing?" At first, Sarah thought it was a doll, but when she looked closer, she realized it was a real baby. Max still didn't answer her question, so she asked it again, this time firmly. "Max, explain. Whose baby is that?" But Max didn't answer. Instead, he began to shiver and tears rolled down his cheeks. "Mom, I'm sorry," Max said at last, his voice shaking. "I have to do this." Sarah was confused and alarmed. She quickly took the baby from Max's arms and examined it carefully. It was a baby girl and she had a slight bruise on her forehead, but otherwise she seemed to be okay. "What happened, Max?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice calm. "I was playing in the park when suddenly someone approached me," Max explained. "They gave me the baby and told me to take care of her. And then they ran away. I swear, I didn't know what to do, so I took her home right away." Sarah's heart sank when she heard her son's story. She knew how dangerous it was to trust a child, and she couldn't believe someone would do something like this. "We need to call the police, Max," Sarah said, her mind racing. "The situation is very serious." They called the police together and waited for them to arrive. Meanwhile, Sarah took care of the baby and comforted her as best she could for about an hour before the police finally arrived. They took the baby and Max's statement and promised to find out who left him the baby. Days passed and Sarah and Max didn't hear anything from the police. The baby was back and Sarah was worried sick, and in the same toxic environment, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story than Max was telling her. So she took matters into her own hands and started investigating. Sarah retraced Max's steps from the day he found the baby. She talked to her son and asked him to write down exactly what he did and where he went that day. Max was a little confused about everything, but he tried. "You know, that day, he gave his mother a note with instructions." When Max handed the note to her mother, she sprang into action and told her son to stay home until she got back. It seemed like a harmless situation, but it could soon escalate, and Max hesitantly agreed. He really wanted to help his mother, but he understood the danger of the situation. The next day, Sarah took the note to the park. She's walking the same path that Max walked the other day, but she didn't see anything suspicious. When she arrived at the park, she sat on a bench and observed her surroundings for a while. After observing nothing suspicious, Sarah decided it was time to change tack. So she starts talking to some people in the park, looking for any clues that might lead her to the mystery person who gave Max the baby. But nothing seems to work. She even went to nearby hospitals and clinics hoping to find the people who had been searching for the missing baby, but sadly she still didn't know who the parents were. It went on for a few days and people started recognizing Sarah in the park. Suddenly, Sarah had a breakthrough. One morning, Sarah received an anonymous tip that someone was in front of her. A small note was taped to the door. Sarah quickly took the note inside and read it in the safety of her own home. The note read, "Every Wednesday a woman sits in the same place in the park. Sarah was ecstatic just looking at the children, and luckily it was a Wednesday, so she immediately took Max with her to the park, hoping he would recognize the woman. Max and his friends went off to play while Sarah sat on a bench with her eyes wide open for a childless woman. 30 minutes later, a woman in oversized sunglasses is sitting on a park bench. She was alone without her children. Sarah had been watching this lady all day, and in fact, all she was doing was watching the children. Sarah thought it was strange. Suddenly, the woman stood up and left the park. Sarah quickly grabs Max and they follow her for a few miles to a rundown apartment building on the outskirts of town. Sarah carefully parked the car across the street from the building. "Max, I want you to stay in the car while I go in," Sarah said firmly. "But Mom, I want to help," Max protested. "I know, honey, but it's not safe," Sarah explained. "Stay in the car and watch for anything suspicious." Max sighed impatiently and settled back into his seat. Sarah got out of the car and walked toward the apartment building as unobtrusively as possible. She needed to act like she knew the place so as not to arouse suspicion as she climbed the stairs to the second floor with her heart pounding. She went to the door and hesitated for a moment before knocking. Doubt crept into her mind. Was this a good idea? What if the situation escalates? Or what if she puts herself and Max in danger? But she shook her head to remind herself that her children's safety was paramount. She made up her mind and knocked. To her surprise, the door was opened by another woman who appeared to be in her 20s with long dark hair and baggy clothing. Puzzled, she asked, "Can I help you?" "Yes," Sarah said confidently. "I think you can. I'm looking for the man who left the baby with my son," Sarah continued, struggling to keep her voice steady. "I don't know what you're talking about," the woman said and began to close the door. Sarah quickly put her foot in the door to prevent it from closing. She heard a baby crying in the apartment. "I think you know what I'm talking about, and I'm not leaving until you tell me," Sarah said. Her anger was growing, but the woman pushed the door and Sarah withdrew her feet in pain. Sarah couldn't believe what had just happened. Was the cry she heard the baby she was looking for? Sarah pounded the door with her fist and yelled at the woman to let her in. Her heart thumped as she realized the woman would never say yes. "Why don't you leave me alone? I'm calling the police," the woman yelled from inside. But Sarah knew she was bluffing. If anyone's gonna call the police, it's gonna be Sarah and not that woman. However, it is clear that this well-intentioned approach is not working. Sarah knew she had to find another way. Sarah's mind raced as she considered her next move. She couldn't let the woman close the door lest she hurt the baby inside. Time was of the essence. Full of determination, Sarah pushed the door open with all her strength and rushed into the apartment, which smelled like a mess of dirty clothes. Apparently, the resident rarely goes outside to play. It was certainly not a safe environment for a child to grow up in, and it made Sarah determined to save the child. She listened intently, trying to locate the baby, but the crying had stopped. Sarah listened carefully and hurried through every room, but there was no one in the house. Where did they go? Suddenly, she heard a dumpster toppling over behind the house. She rushed to the window and saw the woman running away with the baby. Sarah's heart thumped as she watched the woman disappear into the distance, clutching the baby. Sarah was angry and worried, but she jumped out the window and ran after them even though she knew Max was in her lock. She was safe in her car, but she couldn't help worrying about being away for too long. She chased the woman through narrow alleys and through busy streets near collisions with pedestrians and cars as her mind raced to try to make sense of what had happened to this woman, pieced together the mystery of why this child was born. Sarah's maternal instincts were at their limits, and she was determined not to let the woman escape. As Sarah approached the woman, she could hear the baby crying louder, and it made her determined to go after her. After a long wait, she finally found the woman in a deserted alley. The woman looked mad and desperate and held on to the child. "Please, just give me the baby," Sarah said, holding out her arms. She looked at the woman worried, wondering what to do next. Because the woman has already run away once and Sarah suspects she might run away again. "Please, I can help. Give me the baby," Sarah begged again. However, the lady looked nervous and the woman stammered to explain, but Sarah didn't believe her. She demanded that the woman hand over the baby immediately, and tears ran down the woman's face as she reluctantly handed the baby over to Sarah. Sarah held the child in her arms and felt relieved that the child was back in her care. The baby appeared unharmed but was clearly distressed by the ordeal. Sarah looked at the woman sobbing uncontrollably and her anger eased. She realized that there was something else going on with this woman and decided to deal with it with compassion rather than anger. Sarah took a deep breath and whispered to the woman, "What happened? Why did you leave the baby with my son?" Through her tears, the woman looked up at Sarah with pain and despair in her eyes and explained that she was the baby's mother but had been struggling with postpartum depression. Her inability to provide the love and care that the child needed had recently reached breaking point, and, not knowing what else to do, she left the child with Sarah's son Max. "I hope he's taken care of." Sarah felt sorry for the woman who had suffered so much. Sarah deeply sympathizes with the challenges of motherhood and the damage postnatal depression can do to a person's mental health. Despite her initial anger, Sarah realized that the woman wasn't really a threat. It was someone in need, and Sarah didn't hesitate to show her support for the woman. Sarah assured the woman that she would not report her to the authorities and promised to help her get the help she needed. The woman was hesitant at first but was deeply moved by Sarah's kind words and genuine concern. Eventually, she opened up to Sarah and shared her struggles and fears. Sarah listened intently and spoke words of encouragement and understanding as they sat in the alley with the child in Sarah's arms, and Sarah poured out her heart. She revealed that after the birth of her daughter, she felt overwhelmed and isolated and didn't know how to ask for help. Upon hearing of Sarah's kindness and reputation in the community, the woman impulsively decides to leave the baby with Max. "I hope she's safe and taken care of." Sarah assured the woman that she understood that she was not alone in her reasoning and encouraged the woman to seek professional help for her postnatal depression, and offered to connect her with local resources. The woman was hesitant at first, but Sarah's compassion and support eventually convinced her. They exchanged contact information, and Sarah promised to follow up and help in any way she could. With the spread of the situation, Sarah took the child back to his car, has been worried about the child Max to see his mother relieved. There was also the child Sarah, who explained what had happened, and Max understood and compassionately offered to help care for the child. And supporting Sarah as best he could, they drove home together and stopped at a baby supply store to pick up some essentials. Sarah had bonded with the baby and was determined to give her the best care possible, and Max was thrilled to have a little sister who couldn't stop smiling at her. Over the next few days, Sarah and Max took care of the baby together, and they bonded with the child and named her Emily. Sarah regularly contacted the woman to check on her condition and help her in her quest for postnatal depression. Professional help navigating the process with Sarah's support, the woman began receiving the medical care and treatment she needed. As time goes by, Sarah and Max grew to like Emily and consider adopting her. They knew the woman was still struggling and might not be able to provide a stable and nurturing environment for Emily. Sarah set up a meeting with Emily's birth mother to ask her how she was doing, and then waited for the right moment to ask the important question. "We've been thinking," Sarah began. "We want to adopt Emily permanently." There was a pause on the line, and eventually the mother agreed. She realized it was the best decision for her daughter because she knew Sarah could give her the life she deserved. The adoption process wasn't easy, but with Sarah's determination and Max's unwavering support, they went through the legal process and the paperwork. Finally, Emily officially became Sarah's daughter, and they were so happy to welcome her into their family with open arms. Over time, the woman who left Emily with Max found stability and support through therapy and medical treatment.